My name is Alice, and I never thought love could hurt this much. Joe had been my boyfriend for 3 years, the kind of man who smiled and made promises that felt eternal. I trusted him completely. I believed he was my future. But I was wrong. It all started at my cousin Sarah's birthday party. I had been excited to celebrate her. Joe came too, wearing that charming smile that made my heart flutter. Everything seemed normal until I saw him laughing at something Sarah said. A little too close, a little too intimate. I shrugged it off at first. Maybe I was imagining things. Then, a week later, he called me. Alice, I think I need a break. What? I asked, heart stopping. I'm with someone else, he whispered. My world shattered. The someone else was Sarah. My cousin. My family. My safe space. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I wanted to cry, scream, disappear, but I didn't. Because in that moment, I realized something powerful. Joe had underestimated me. And people who underestimate me always pay. The first night after Joe left, I didn't sleep. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding with betrayal and anger. Sarah's name echoed in my mind. I couldn't believe she had done this, smiling, laughing, and taking something that wasn't hers. I thought about calling Joe, confronting him, screaming at both of them. But I didn't. I realized early that night that tears wouldn't fix anything. Rage wouldn't fix anything. I needed a plan. A smart, careful plan. I started small. I blocked Joe everywhere. Calls, messages, social media. Sarah's accounts too. I didn't want to see their smiles, their happiness, their betrayal. Then, I began observing quietly. Every interaction, every word, every post, they all told me something. Joe was careless. Sarah was shallow. And both of them had no idea that the one they had hurt most was quietly watching, waiting, and learning. Weeks passed. I focused on myself, my career, my friends, my own happiness. I transformed my sadness into something sharper, a mind that could outthink them both. And while they laughed and assumed I was broken, I plotted. Because I knew, deep down, the day would come when Joe would beg. And when it did, I would decide if he got forgiveness or revenge. I started attending social events I normally wouldn't, galas, networking events, and even small parties, always keeping my eyes open, always learning. People underestimate the quiet ones, I realized. While Joe and Sarah flaunted their love, I built connections, information, and influence. It wasn't about money, not yet. It was about leverage, knowledge, understanding their habits, weaknesses, and patterns. I discovered small things. Joe had a gambling problem he hid from everyone. Sarah's ambition was shallow. She wanted attention more than stability. I made mental notes, cataloged every weakness, and observed how easily their relationship could crumble. And I waited. Then one day, Joe showed up at my office, heart in his throat. Alice, can we talk? I raised an eyebrow. Calm, collected. About what? He hesitated, guilt painted on his face. About us. I made a mistake. I smiled faintly. Oh, really? You left me for my cousin. That's the mistake. He faltered. I realized I love you. I made a terrible choice. Can we start over? My chest tightened. I could see the desperation. And I knew this was the moment. The moment when a man who betrayed me would finally see the consequences of his actions. The moment when I decided if he deserved redemption or ruin. I didn't answer immediately. I let him stand there, guilt radiating, as I observed him carefully. You think a simple apology fixes this? I asked. My voice was calm, almost cold. I'll do anything, he whispered. Please, Alice. I made a terrible mistake. I studied his face. He was desperate, pleading, and afraid. That fear gave me power. I reminded him gently but firmly, you left me. For my cousin. You shattered trust. Do you understand how deep that cuts? He nodded vigorously, swallowing hard. I know. I'll do anything to fix it. Anything. I repeated. Even if it's uncomfortable, embarrassing, or painful. He faltered. Yes, anything. I smiled faintly. Good. Because if you want forgiveness, you'll have to earn it. You'll have to prove you're worthy, and that's not easy. I could see the weight in his chest. Joe had assumed he could waltz back into my life with words. He didn't realize words weren't enough anymore. I had learned patience, strategy, observation, and I had learned something more important. Revenge doesn't always mean destruction. It can mean empowerment. And I was ready to empower myself. At his expense. The rules had changed. Joe would either follow them or watch everything he thought he'd slip away forever. Over the next few weeks, I set my plan in motion. Joe tried to text, call, and even show up unannounced. Each attempt, I handled carefully. I didn't react with emotion. I reacted with strategy. I started subtly showing him the consequences of his actions. I hinted at my own successes, promotions at work, social recognition, new friends, and let him see that life moved forward even without him. Sarah, of course, saw my calm and assumed I was broken. That made her reckless. She flaunted her relationship with Joe, making tiny mistakes that I cataloged silently. One evening, Joe cornered me at a mutual friends gathering. "Alice, please. I was wrong. I can't live without you. I'll do anything." I held his gaze. "Anything?" "Yes," he whispered. I smiled slowly, letting the tension hang in the air. "Then maybe you can start by proving it. Actions, not words." His eyes widened. He didn't realize what he had walked into. Because for the first time, I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't desperate. I was Alice, sharp, focused, and ready to turn betrayal into a lesson he would never forget. And that lesson would come soon. I decided it was time to take control fully. Joe had made the mistake of assuming I'd crumble, cry, and beg him back. But I hadn't. Instead, I started observing everything. His habits, Sarah's weaknesses, even our mutual friends. Everything was data, everything a tool. Sarah loved showing off her perfect life with Joe. She flaunted pictures on social media, posted stories about romantic dates, and left little hints about their routine. Every post was a mistake, proof of their carelessness, of their arrogance. I documented everything. Screenshots, photos, even little observations in a notebook I kept hidden. Then I began subtly improving my own life. Promotions at work, recognition in social circles, new friends, each achievement carefully timed to make Joe feel the weight of what he'd lost. Weeks passed, and Joe's desperation grew. He started reaching out more often, his texts growing frantic, pleading. One evening, he appeared at my apartment unannounced. "Alice, please, I need to talk," he begged. I let him in, calm and collected. "Talk?" I asked, leaning against the kitchen counter. "After everything, you just show up and expect forgiveness?" His eyes fell to the floor. I made a mistake. I love you. I don't know what I was thinking with Sarah." I studied him. I could see guilt and fear intertwined. Good, because now the game had changed. I wasn't the girl he left. I was the one holding the power. And Joe would have to prove he deserved a place back in my life, or lose everything forever. I decided to make Joe sweat for his betrayal. He expected me to forgive him instantly, but I wasn't that naive. I needed to see sincerity, actions, not words. I set small tests for him, things that would show whether he truly regretted his choices. The first test, honesty. I casually mentioned an event I was attending and saw if he'd lie to try to impress me or admit he had nothing planned. He lied. Predictable. The second test, restraint. When he tried to call me incessantly, I didn't answer. Not once. He started showing panic in his messages. Each day, I responded less and less, letting his desperation grow. The third test, accountability. I asked him indirectly if he had apologized to anyone, Sarah, friends, family. His hesitation told me everything. I realized one thing clearly. Joe hadn't changed overnight. He was still selfish, still impulsive. But that was fine, because now I had leverage. I controlled the pace, the rules, the outcome. And every mistake he made in these tests made him look smaller, weaker, and more desperate in my eyes. By the end of the week, Joe was begging for another chance in front of friends, completely humiliated. But I didn't give in. Not yet, because humiliation alone wasn't enough. The next phase, the one that would teach him a lesson he'd never forget, was about to begin. I invited Joe to dinner one evening, but not to forgive him. I chose the restaurant carefully, quiet, intimate, and one where I could orchestrate everything. When he arrived, he wore a nervous smile, trying to charm me. "Alice, thank you for meeting me. I need to explain everything." I sipped my drink slowly, observing him. "Explain?" I asked. "You left me for my cousin Joe. You shattered my trust. What is there to explain?" He faltered. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought I loved her, but I was wrong. I realized I love you. I cut him off. "Love me? You don't understand love. Love isn't leaving someone for another person. Love isn't betrayal." His face went pale. "Alice, please, I held up my hand. Actions speak louder than words. Tonight isn't about words. It's about proving yourself." His eyes widened. "Proving myself. Yes. You will follow every instruction I give. No excuses. No complaints. You will show me you're worthy of even being near me." He gulped. Okay. I'll do whatever you want." I leaned in slightly, letting the tension hang in the air. He had no idea that by agreeing, he had stepped into a test designed to expose every flaw in his character, every selfish choice he'd made, and every betrayal he had caused. Tonight, I would begin the part of my plan that would make him realize he had lost more than he ever imagined. And Joe had no clue that he was already trapped. The first step of the plan, public accountability. I invited mutual friends to dinner without telling Joe the true reason. As he walked in, I watched him realize that the group was aware of his betrayal. Their subtle looks, half-whispered comments, all added to his panic. You invited them," he whispered, panic creeping into his voice. I smiled faintly. "Of course. You said you wanted to prove yourself. This is the first test." Throughout dinner, I asked pointed questions, making sure Joe admitted his mistakes in front of everyone. He stumbled, stammered, and finally blushed with humiliation. Sarah's name came up. He couldn't avoid it. Every lie, every excuse, every false justification crumbled in front of our friends. By the end of the night, Joe was visibly shaken. Sweat beaded his forehead. His pride was gone. He looked at me, desperation clear. "Alice, please. I'll do anything else. Just tell me what to do." I leaned back, keeping my composure. "This is just the beginning, Joe. Actions, not words. You still have much to prove." He swallowed hard. "I'll do it. Anything." I knew then that the seeds of true realization were planted. Joe was beginning to understand the depth of his mistakes. And the next step, the one that would ensure he never underestimated me again, was about to come. I decided to escalate. Joe needed to feel the consequences of his betrayal without me being cruel. He needed to understand loss, fear, and humility. I arranged a weekend retreat, supposedly to reconnect with him under controlled circumstances. Little did he know, I had designed challenges to test patience, honesty, and respect. The first activity, problem-solving tasks that required teamwork. Joe immediately tried to dominate, make decisions unilaterally, and assert control. I quietly corrected him, showing him how inept his leadership was. The second activity, social embarrassment. Friends I had invited would ask subtle questions about his choices. Each question exposed a small truth he tried to hide. By the end of the day, Joe was exhausted, humbled, and desperate to earn my approval. He looked at me with wide, pleading eyes. "Alice, tell me what else I need to do. I'll follow anything." I smiled faintly. "Good. You're learning. But there's one last lesson, the one that will make you understand what it means to truly lose." He shivered, unsure if he was excited or terrified. I leaned closer. "Because only after this will you ever have a chance to be with me again." The power had shifted completely. He had begged for my attention, and I held the control. And for the first time, Joe realized that betrayal comes with consequences, and I was just getting started. By the next week, Joe had become predictable. Every move he made, every word he said, every plea for forgiveness, it was all cataloged in my mind. I realized the more desperate he became, the more power I had. I started giving him small, controlled tasks, things that seemed innocent but tested his loyalty and patience. Fetch a document, apologize to someone he had wronged, admit his mistakes publicly. He complied, trembling, sweat forming on his forehead. His pride crumbled slowly, step by step, while I observed quietly. Then I introduced Sarah indirectly. I didn't confront them directly, but I made sure Joe understood that his choices had consequences. Mutual friends would casually mention Sarah, her careless behavior, or even her shallow actions. I never did it myself. It was subtle, psychological, and merciless. Joe started seeing the truth through whispers and indirect hints. The woman he left me for wasn't perfect. She was reckless, shallow, and ultimately irrelevant. The desperation in his eyes was deliciously satisfying, but I didn't let it distract me. I knew patience was key. Every humiliation, every small defeat, every reminder of his betrayal was like a chess move. Joe thought he was playing for love, but in reality, he was playing for redemption in my hands. And if he failed one more test, there would be no redemption at all. The next step had to be perfect. It had to break him completely without breaking me. I set the scene carefully. A weekend getaway, a cabin in the woods, isolated, with just the two of us. It sounded romantic to Joe. Dangerous, powerful, and calculated to me. From the moment he arrived, I controlled everything. Meals, walks, discussions, even the placement of objects in the cabin. Everything served as a psychological test. I didn't give him instructions outright. Instead, I observed. Would he notice my discomfort at certain topics? Would he respect boundaries I didn't verbally enforce? Would he admit his mistakes without being prompted? The first day was subtle. I made tiny observations, noting his reactions to reminders of Sarah, to his friends' past advice, even to trivial mistakes he had made in our relationship. By evening, Joe was tense, anxious, and unsure of every move. Finally, I addressed him directly. Joe, tell me exactly why you left me, and tell me why you think I should forgive you. His voice faltered. I thought I loved her, but I was wrong. I was stupid. Please, Alice. I can't live without you. I studied him carefully. The fear, the regret, the desire, it was all there. Good. Because now he had to understand, words were not enough. He needed to prove himself, or lose me forever. I devised a series of challenges over the weekend, all designed to test Joe's sincerity. The first challenge, humility. I asked him to clean, cook, and organize things in the cabin without complaint. Every task was simple but tedious. He groaned, muttered, and even snapped once, but I didn't intervene. I observed silently. The second challenge, honesty. I asked subtle questions about his actions with Sarah, his motives, and his hidden mistakes. Every lie he attempted revealed his immaturity and selfishness. The third challenge, reflection. I asked him to write down everything he had done to hurt me and how he planned to change. Watching him struggle, I realized how little he had actually understood about betrayal. By the end of the weekend, Joe was exhausted, physically and emotionally. He looked at me, eyes wide and pleading. Alice, I'm sorry. I understand now. Please, tell me I can make this right. I smiled faintly. Maybe, but you need to do one more thing. His face turned pale. What? I leaned in slightly, voice soft but commanding. You need to see the consequences of your actions and the pain you caused. For the first time, Joe realized that forgiveness wasn't guaranteed. And the real lesson, the one he would never forget, was about to begin. I decided it was time for a controlled revelation. I invited Joe to a small gathering of friends, the same people who had witnessed our history. The twist, I orchestrated a game where everyone shared secrets of past betrayals. Casual, light-hearted, but carefully planned to expose Joe's mistakes indirectly. As he realized his missteps were being mentioned, his face flushed crimson. You set this up, he whispered. I smiled softly. You said you'd do anything to prove yourself. This is the first step. He stumbled through each mention, forced to admit his errors, forced to confront the reality of his betrayal publicly. I watched silently as he squirmed, guilt and embarrassment filling the room. Finally, I looked at him and said, Do you understand now? Do you see what your choices cost? He swallowed hard. I understand. I know I don't deserve forgiveness yet. Good, I said, because forgiveness isn't given freely. It's earned, and sometimes it's not earned at all. Joe's desperation grew, but he couldn't argue. Every word I had spoken, every test I had created, had shown him the magnitude of his mistakes. I realized then that revenge didn't have to be cruel, It could be calculated, methodical, and deeply satisfying. Joe wasn't just learning a lesson. He was feeling the consequences of his betrayal in a way that words alone could never convey. By the end of the night, Joe was broken, but not entirely hopeless. He approached me cautiously. "Alice, I'll do anything. Tell me what else I need to do. I'll follow every instruction." I studied him carefully. His pride was gone, replaced by humility, fear, and desire. I leaned closer. "You have one last task," I said softly, "and it will decide if you ever have a chance with me again." He nodded, trembling. "Anything." I smiled faintly, letting the tension hang. "You need to show me that you truly understand what you did, and that you will never, ever hurt me again. Not with words, not with promises, with actions. 4 months, maybe years, you will earn back even a sliver of trust." Joe's eyes widened. "Months? Years?" "Yes," I said firmly. "Because trust isn't rebuilt overnight, and neither is respect. You left me for my cousin. That's not something that can be fixed with apologies." He swallowed hard, nodding repeatedly. I realized in that moment something profound. Power had shifted. Joe had begged, pleaded, and tried to manipulate. But now the choice was mine entirely. I was no longer the girl he abandoned. I was the woman who decided who deserved happiness and who would face the consequences of betrayal. I watched Joe closely for weeks, observing every mistake he made, every sign of desperation. He assumed he was earning forgiveness through actions, but I was testing him in ways he couldn't see. Subtle choices, hidden consequences, each designed to make him truly understand betrayal. One morning, I confronted him directly. "Joe, do you really understand what you did to me?" He hesitated, eyes downcast. I think so." "Think." I raised an eyebrow. "You left me for my cousin, humiliated me in front of family and friends. You tore trust apart. Thinking isn't enough." His chest rose and fell rapidly. "Then tell me what I need to do." "I'll do it." I smiled faintly. "It's not about what you do. It's about what you feel and learn. You'll face the consequences of every selfish choice you made. You'll see what betrayal really costs." He swallowed hard. Panic flickered in his eyes. "Anything. I'll do anything." Good. Because now the stage was set. I had orchestrated a plan so precise that every move Joe made would either redeem him or break him completely. And I wasn't sure he would survive it emotionally. The next days would be decisive. Joe would either understand the true weight of his betrayal, or he would lose me forever. And I would watch, because power had shifted, and I intended to use it fully. I introduced Joe to a controlled series of tests under the guise of rebuilding trust. Each day, I asked him to face situations that reminded him of his betrayal. Small social encounters, subtle triggers about Sarah, and quiet moments where he had to choose humility over arrogance. The first test was public reflection. I arranged a small gathering with friends, subtly steering conversations toward relationships and honesty. Joe stumbled over his words, admitted truths he'd hoped no one would notice, and felt shame. The second test was patience. I made him wait, delayed his calls, ignored his frantic texts. He grew frantic, obsessive, desperate. The third was respect. I gave him control in small tasks, but always observed silently, ensuring he acted without arrogance, without manipulation. By the end of the week, Joe was exhausted, physically, mentally, and emotionally. He looked at me, pleading, "Alice, please, tell me I can make this right." I leaned back, calm, letting him feel the full weight of his actions. "Maybe," I said slowly, "but there's one final test, one that will determine everything." He shivered, uncertain if he was ready. Good. Because he hadn't realized the hardest lesson, loss and regret, was about to hit him. And this time, there would be no excuses. I set the final stage carefully. A private weekend retreat, isolated cabin, minimal distractions. I made it sound romantic, a chance to reconnect, but every detail was intentional. From the moment Joe arrived, I controlled the environment. Meals, conversations, even seating arrangements were designed to test him. The first challenge was humility. I asked him to complete mundane tasks I normally would do, cleaning, cooking, organizing without complaint. He grumbled, hesitated, and made mistakes, but I observed silently. The second challenge was honesty. I asked pointed questions about Sarah, our past, and his feelings. Lies crumbled under scrutiny, leaving him exposed. The third was self-awareness. I instructed him to write down every action that hurt me and reflect on it. He struggled, shaking, realizing the magnitude of his mistakes. By the evening, Joe was exhausted and humbled. He approached me cautiously. "Alice, I'm sorry. I understand now. I'll do whatever it takes." I studied him carefully. Understanding isn't enough. You must act consistently, for months. Only then will you even begin to earn a chance at my trust. His eyes widened. "Months?" "Yes," I said firmly, because betrayal isn't repaired overnight. The power had completely shifted. Joe, who had once held my heart, was now entirely in my hands, and I intended to ensure he never forgot that. The following week, Joe tried desperately to prove himself. He called, texted, and attempted small gestures of kindness, but I didn't allow emotions to cloud judgment. Every move was a test. I monitored his every interaction, noting sincerity and consistency. One slip, one selfish thought, and the opportunity vanished. I also began observing Sarah indirectly. She had grown careless, flaunting their relationship, revealing her shallow intentions. I cataloged every misstep, preparing for the moment Joe would see the truth. Then one evening, Joe confessed to me fully, vulnerability in his eyes. "Alice, I've realized she wasn't right for me. I only ever loved you. Please, let me prove it." I smiled faintly. "Good. You've learned one thing. Betrayal comes with consequences. But you haven't learned everything yet. There's one more lesson." He swallowed hard, uncertain. "What is it?" "Actions matter more than words. And some mistakes can never be fully undone." I let him sit in silence, feeling the weight of his past decisions. For the first time, Joe truly understood fear, not of losing me, but of facing the reality he had created. And I knew that by the time I revealed the final truth, he would never underestimate me again. The lesson of betrayal was almost complete, and the reckoning was near. I orchestrated the final confrontation carefully. We sat alone, the cabin quiet, tension thick in the air. Joe looked at me, unsure, fearful. "Alice, tell me what I need to do. I'll follow everything you say." I leaned in slightly. "Joe, you left me for my cousin. You humiliated me publicly, shattered trust, and thought you could waltz back into my life. Do you understand the magnitude?" He nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "Yes, I understand." "Good," I said calmly. "Now you'll face the consequences. Not cruelty, but the truth. Every action you took, every lie, every betrayal will be reflected back to you." His face paled. "Consequences?" "Yes," I said. "And the most important one, you will see what you lost, and you will learn that some bridges cannot be rebuilt overnight." He trembled, realizing fully that I held the power. 4 months, he had assumed forgiveness would come easily. Now, he understood that redemption required patience, humility, and deep reflection. And I knew one thing clearly. Joe would never forget the lessons I had meticulously crafted. And by the time he did, he would know exactly who Alice had become. Strong, calculated, untouchable. And betrayal, no matter how tempting, would never cross my path again. The final stage was psychological. I orchestrated a social event under the guise of a casual dinner with friends. Joe had no idea it was designed to expose his arrogance and make him face the reality of his betrayal. As conversations unfolded, I guided subtle remarks toward loyalty, trust, and consequences of betrayal. Joe's face turned pale, guilt and shame evident in every twitch, every stammer. You set this up," he whispered under his breath. I smiled faintly. "You wanted a chance to prove yourself. This is the first step." Friends subtly teased, hinted, and joked about past mistakes. Joe stumbled, admitted truths he had tried to hide, and realized fully how obvious his failures were. By the end of the night, he was exhausted, ashamed, and desperate. He approached me quietly. "Alice, please, tell me what else I need to do." I leaned in, voice soft but commanding. "There's one final lesson, and it will teach you the weight of betrayal. Only after this will you even have a chance at redemption." Joe shivered. He understood now. He wasn't in control. I was. And the lesson was about to begin. The next morning, I confronted him privately. Joe, do you see what your choices cost? I asked. His voice trembled. Yes. I understand. I know I hurt you deeply. I'll do anything to fix it. I studied him carefully. Actions, not words. Do you understand? Yes, he whispered. I do. I explained the final stage. Months of proving loyalty, consistency, humility, and respect. Every word and action would be scrutinized. Joe's eyes widened. Months. Yes, I said firmly. Betrayal cannot be undone overnight. He swallowed hard, realizing the weight of what he'd done. I had orchestrated every detail carefully. He would feel the consequences fully without me being cruel. He would understand loss, regret, and humility. For the first time, Joe realized the magnitude of his mistakes, and he knew that earning back trust was more difficult than he had ever imagined. Weeks passed. Joe attempted to prove himself, following every task, answering every question, respecting every boundary. His desperation remained, but slowly, humility and patience replaced arrogance. I also observed Sarah indirectly. She had grown careless, revealing her shallow motives and lack of substance. Joe began to see the truth. She was not the one he truly loved. The combination of public accountability, private reflection, and subtle lessons reshaped him. One evening, he approached me eyes wide. Alice, I see it now. I understand fully. Please, tell me what else I can do. I smiled faintly. You've learned a lot, but remember, some bridges, even rebuilt, will never be the same. He nodded, finally accepting that trust is fragile and that betrayal leaves scars. I realized then that revenge didn't have to be cruel. It could be precise, calculated, and transformative. Joe wasn't just learning a lesson. He was facing the consequences of every choice he made. The final week came. Joe had become careful, humble, and patient. I observed quietly, letting him prove consistency. Every word and action mattered. Finally, I allowed a moment of reflection. Joe, tell me honestly, what have you learned? He swallowed hard. I've learned that betrayal destroys everything. That love isn't just words, it's trust, respect, and loyalty. I see what I lost. I understand now, fully. I nodded slowly. Good. That understanding is more valuable than forgiveness. Remember this always. Joe looked relieved, but he also understood something deeper. He would never be careless again. He had faced consequences, humiliation, and reflection, and emerged transformed. I had not only protected my heart but taught a powerful lesson. Betrayal has limits, and those who underestimate me pay the price. Power, control, and intelligence had shifted entirely in my favor, and I felt unstoppable. I watched Joe leave, humbled, exhausted, and forever changed. He had begged, pleaded, and worked to earn back my trust. And while forgiveness could be considered someday, I knew one thing clearly. I had regained control. I was Alice, strong, calculated, untouchable. I had turned betrayal into empowerment. I had turned heartbreak into strategy. And as I walked away from the past, I felt lighter, free, and fully in control of my life. Joe and Sarah would always remember the consequences of underestimating me. And I would never forget the power that comes from patience, intelligence, and self-respect. Some lessons can't be forgotten. Some betrayals can't be erased, but the way you respond defines your strength. I smiled faintly, because I had not just survived betrayal. I had mastered it, and no one, no boyfriend, no cousin, no one, would ever hold power over me again. The game was over. I had won, and this time, the victory was mine.